Section 7 of The Life of Samuel Johnson, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jason Isbell, www.shabamdevelopment.com. The Life of Samuel Johnson, Volume 1, by James Boswell. Section 7. In a man whom religious education has secured from licentious indulgences, the passion of love, when once it has seized him, is exceedingly strong, being unimpaired by dissipation and totally concentrated in one object. This was experienced by Johnson when he became the fervent admirer of Mrs. Porter after her first husband's death. Miss Porter told me that when he was first introduced to her mother, his appearance was very foreboding. He was then lean and lank, so that his immense structure of bones was hideously striking to the eye, and the scars of the scapula were deeply visible. He also wore his hair, which was straight and stiff, and separated behind, and he had seemingly convulsive starts and odd gesticulations, which tended to excite at once surprise and ridicule. Mrs. Porter was so much engaged by his conversation that she overlooked all these external disadvantages, and said to her daughter, "This is the most sensible man that I ever saw in my life." Though Mrs. Porter was double the age of Johnson, and her person and manner, as described to me by the late Mr. Garrick, were by no means pleasing to others, she must have had a superiority of understanding and talents, as she certainly inspired him with a more than ordinary passion, and she, having signified her willingness to accept of his hand, he went to Lichfield to ask his mother's consent to marriage, which he could not but be conscious was a very imprudent scheme, both on account of their disparity of years and her want of fortune. But Mrs. Johnson knew too well the ardor of her son's temper, and was too tender a parent to oppose his inclinations. I know not for what reason the marriage ceremony was not performed at Birmingham, but a resolution was taken that it should be at Derby, for which place the bride and bridegroom set out on a horseback, I suppose in very good humour. But though Mr. Topham Beauclerk used archly to mention Johnson's having told him, with much gravity, "Sir, it was a love marriage on both sides," I have had from my illustrious friend the following curious account of their journey to church upon the nuptial morn. 9th of July. Sir, she had read the old romances, and had got into her head the fanatical notion that a woman of spirit should use her lover like a dog. So, sir, at first she told me that I rode too fast, and she could not keep up with me, and when I rode a little slower, she passed me and complained that I lagged behind. I was not to be made the slave of caprice, and I resolved to begin as I meant to end. I therefore pushed on briskly till I was fairly out of her sight. The road lay between two hedges, so I was sure she could not miss it, and I contrived that she should soon come up on me. When she did, I observed her to be in tears. This, it must be allowed, was a singular beginning of connubial felicity, but there is no doubt that Johnson, though he thus shewed a manly firmness, proved a most affectionate and indulgent husband to the last moment of Mrs. Johnson's life, and in his Prayers and Meditations we find very remarkable evidence that his regard and fondness for her never ceased, even after her death. He now set up a private academy, for which purpose he hired a large house, well situated near his native city. In the Gentleman's Magazine for 1736 there is the following advertisement: "At Edial, near Lichfield, in Staffordshire, young gentlemen are boarded and taught the Latin and Greek languages by Samuel Johnson. But the only pupils that were put under his care were the celebrated David Garrick and his brother George, and a Mr. Offley, a young gentleman of good fortune who died early. As yet his name had nothing of that celebrity which afterwards commanded the highest attention and respect of mankind. Had such an advertisement appeared after the publication of his London, or his Rambler, or his Dictionary, how would it have burst upon the world? With what eagerness would the great and the wealthy have embraced an opportunity of putting their sons under the learned tuition of Samuel Johnson! The truth, however, is that he was not so well qualified for being a teacher of elements and a conductor in learning by regular graduations as men of inferior powers of mind. His own acquisitions had been made by fits and starts, by violent eruptions into the regions of knowledge, and it could not be expected that his impatience would be subdued, and his impetuosity restrained, so as to fit him for a quiet guide to novices. The art of communicating instruction, of whatever kind, is much to be valued, and I have ever thought that those who devote themselves to this employment, and do their duty with diligence and success, are entitled to very high respect from the community, as Johnson himself often maintained. Yet I am of opinion that the greatest abilities are not only not required for this office, but render a man less fit for it. While he acknowledges the justness of Thomson's beautiful remark, "Delightful task to rear the tender thought, and teach the young idea how to shoot," we must consider that this delight is perceptible only by a mind at ease, a mind at once calm and clear, but that a mind gloomy and impetuous like that of Johnson cannot be fixed for any length of time in minute attention, and must be so frequently irritated by unavoidable slowness and error in the advances of scholars, as to perform the duty with little pleasure to the teacher, and no great advantage to the pupil. Good temper is a most essential requisite in a preceptor. Horace paints the character as bland. Ut pueris ulem dant crustula blandi, doctores elementa velent ut descere. Johnson was not more satisfied with his situation as the master of an academy than with that of the usher of a school. We need not wonder, therefore, that he did not keep his academy above a year and a half. From Mr. Garrick's account, he did not appear to have been profoundly reverenced by his pupils. His oddities of manner and uncouth gesticulations could not but be the subject of merriment to them, and in particular the young rogues used to listen at the door of his bedchamber, and peep through the keyhole, that they might turn into ridicule his tumultuous and awkward fondness for Mrs. Johnson, whom he used to name by the familiar appellations of Teddy or Tetsy, which, like Betty or Betsy, is provincially used as a contraction for Elizabeth, her Christian name, but which to us seem ludicrous when applied to a woman of her age and appearance. Mr. Garrick described her to be as very fat, with her bosom of more than ordinary protuberance, with swelled cheeks of a florid red, produced by thick painting, and increased by the liberal use of cordials, flaring and fantastic in her dress, and affected both in her speech and her general behavior. I have seen Garrick exhibit her, by his exquisite talent of mimicry, so as to excite the heartiest bursts of laughter, but he, probably, as is the case in all such representations, considerably aggravated the picture.